What's up, my friends? I hope you're doing well today on this lovely Saturday. I've seen a lot of channels cover this rape gang inquiry that recently came out of the UK. Most of the channels that I've seen covering it were men, and so I wanted to kind of cover it from a female's point of view because most of these victims were females. There were men as well. There were boys that were also involved, but a lot of these testimonies we're going to hear are from a female perspective, and so I just wanted to read it to you. We're going to just start right here at this London part, and then it's going to lead right into these testimonies. So here we go. London stands exposed as the epicenter of institutional denial in the grooming gang scandal. While northern towns faced public inquiries after the truth emerged, the capital maintained a wall of silence for years. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has repeatedly insisted there were no grooming gangs operating in the city. Interesting. And why do you think that is? Because he needs their votes. As our inquiry heard from Susan Hall, leader of the Conservatives in the London Assembly, the rape gang phenomenon is in fact endemic within the capital. After challenging Khan about the presence of such gangs in London, Hall was inundated with calls from women and girls purporting to be victims of their predation. Khan describes evidence from whistleblowers as malicious and politically motivated. What a disgrace. Honestly, the leaders over in the UK, heads need to be rolling over this. This is an absolute atrocity. He told the London Assembly that the problem was far more complex than in other parts of the country, and that young people were being exploited through county lines rather than organized group-based child exploitation. These statements were made despite the Metropolitan Police holding reports of young girls being plied with alcohol and drugs and then raped by groups of men in hotels and other locations across the capital. A Daily Express investigation revealed that Khan had direct access to HM Inspectorate of Constabulary documents detailing exactly these patterns of offending. I apologize. Sometimes I get tripped up with words. He read the files, yet continued to deny the existence of grooming gangs in public. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phillip MP has accused Khan of facilitating a cover-up, and other politicians stated that both the mayor and the Metropolitan Police had been denying grooming gangs in London. I've actually seen news over here in the US denying grooming gangs in London, which is pretty sickening. Campaigners, including whistleblower Maggie Oliver and Chris Wilde, described the capital as a last bastion of denial and warned that the scale of abuse there was more catastrophic than anywhere else in the country. The evidence now emerging confirms their warnings. In October 2025, the Metropolitan Police announced a review of 9,000 child sexual exploitation cases. The National Crime Agency launched Operation Beaconport to examine thousands more files nationwide after initial assessments found human errors, missed lines of inquiry, and cases wrongly dropped. London forms a significant part of this backlog. A former Metropolitan Police detective has described industrial-scale child prostitution and grooming in the capital, with authorities aware but opting for inaction due to a mixture of incompetence, laziness, and corruption. Interesting. What does that sound like to you guys? The Epstein files, perhaps? Another atrocity that was allowed to go on because people were corrupt. They didn't want to lose their money. They didn't want to lose their votes. And they were just point blank lazy and didn't care. London has the largest Muslim population in Britain. Khan relies on significant electoral support from those communities, as well as having an ethno-religious motive to protect the public reputation of Pakistani Muslims in particular. Widespread acknowledgement of organized networks of predominantly Pakistani Muslim men targeting vulnerable white girls would have shattered the narrative of community cohesion that successive London administrations, none more than Khan's, have promoted. As for others in authority, fear of being labeled racist paralyzed the Metropolitan Police and City Hall in the same way it did in Rotherham and Rockdale before them. One anonymous whistleblower told us that boys as well as girls are an especially vulnerable target for criminal gangs, typically Albanian, Somali, or Turkish, operating in the capital. Yet the relevant bodies still refuse to collect data on ethnicity, willfully rendering themselves blind to the very behavioral patterns that are supposed to aid law enforcement in its pursuit of justice, because they didn't want to be called racist. So they basically let all this go for the sake of not being quote unquote racist. The Metropolitan Police Review, the National Crime Agency operation, and the witness accounts pouring in prove that group based child exploitation has thrived in our capital city. This inquiry records the failure without reservation. Khan and the senior leadership of the Metropolitan Police must answer for their role in this scandal. Until the capital confronts the truth with the same rigor now demanded elsewhere, the children of London remain at risk and the state remains complicit. I got chills. Okay, guys, it's gonna get a little graphic here. I just want to give a trigger warning. I don't usually do that, but if you've got kids in the room, please get them out of the room. But as if you're an adult, like, you should be able to listen to this. We all need to hear their stories, because again, part of solving a problem, I've said this before, part of solving a problem is acknowledging that there is a problem and letting that come to light and really understanding what has happened. So, victim testimony. There are thousands of survivors who could have provided evidence to our inquiry team. Below is a summary of some of the testimony. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Below is a summary of some of the testimony provided by our brave witnesses who spoke at the inquiry hearings. Some of the witnesses have to remain anonymous for their own safety. So, this first testimony, her name is Chloe. Throughout her early childhood, Chloe was popular at school, performed well academically, and enjoyed an active social life. Although her parents separated when she was young, she describes her early upbringing as relatively stable. Following the separation, full custody of Chloe and her older brother was awarded to their father, despite his alcoholism. Her mother, on the other hand, was often absent from her life and became homeless following the separation. Chloe recalls a generally secure and supportive home environment under the care of her father. However, following his sudden death just before her 10th birthday, she moved in with her mother and her mother's new husband, a man she describes as a pedophile, by whom she was sexually abused. Chloe's mother caught her husband assaulting Chloe on many occasions, but did little to stop it. On one occasion, Chloe's mother caught her husband in the shower with Chloe, and instead of intervening, she closed the door and walked out. At this time, Chloe was 10 years old. Oh my goodness. That's difficult to read. The abuse soon escalated to rape. Chloe's stepfather supplied her with alcohol and cigarettes to keep her quiet, and she began smoking cannabis. Around the same time, Chloe started taunting and spending time in the local town center with a friend unsupervised. She describes groups of Muslim men, primarily Pakistanis, aged 20 to over 50, showing them attention, including wolf whistling and buying them alcohol. Many were taxi drivers who would take the girls into their cars and drive them around the town. At this stage, there was no sexual abuse, and although the men's behavior was clearly inappropriate, Chloe and her friend, then in their final year of primary school, enjoyed being treated like adults. Of course they did. I mean, when you're a kid, this is how they do. This is how grooming works. When you're a kid, you dream of being an adult, and so they kind of treat you like an adult to get you all buttered up so that they can do whatever they want to you. And it's a shame. Clearly, they're targeting vulnerable girls. She didn't have her parents, basically, or and the parent that she did have didn't care enough to even help her or do anything to stop this. At this time, oh, I'm sorry. The grooming soon intensified. The provision of alcohol and takeaways was accompanied by emotional manipulation with the men, many of whom were related to one another, presenting themselves as sympathetic friends to Chloe. Chloe describes this process as them mapping out, are you a vulnerable person? Yeah. Physical contact, including kisses and massages, became increasingly common. Meanwhile, the abuse by her stepfather at home worsened, and her mother was all but absent as a guardian. At this time, Chloe had an aunt and uncle who lived nearby, and she often sought refuge with them. She had spent holidays with them during her early childhood and felt that she could trust them. On one occasion, she had visited them while taunting before returning home. I don't know what truanting is. I don't know what that is. Before returning home and spending the day there while her mother and stepfather were at work. To Chloe's surprise, her uncle arrived at her house unannounced an hour later, and she invited him inside. After a brief conversation, Chloe's uncle sexually assaulted her. Chloe resisted, and he relented and left. She told her mother about the assault, and her mother reported it to the police. The police accused Chloe of lying, and no further action was taken. Until this incident, she had regarded her uncle as one of the best people in her life. Afterwards, there were no adults left that Chloe could confide in or seek support from. Increasingly isolated, she became more deeply involved with the groups of Muslim men she encountered in the town center. One evening, Chloe's friend suggested that they travel to a nearby town where one of the men had a hotel room. They were picked up by the man, who was drunk and under the influence of drugs, and taken to the hotel. When they arrived, hotel staff saw them but did not intervene. In the room, the girls were given a potent strain of cannabis, which left Chloe, then 11, absolutely smashed. Chloe's friend was taken into another room by a group of men, and Chloe was groped by the man who remained. Chloe resisted and he hit her. The man did not attempt to sexually assault her again and instead threw the girls, both of whom were still intoxicated, out of the hotel and refused to drive them back to their hometown. They were forced to walk. It was around midnight. Chloe did not want to go back to her home as she feared her mother would beat her for being out late, so she stayed with her friend. In the early hours of the morning, Chloe was collected from her friend's house by the police after her mother reported her missing. Chloe lied to the police and her mother about where she had been. Chloe's mother grounded her for a month, meaning she was stuck at home with her predatory stepfather, a period she describes as torture. After the month passed, Chloe arranged to see her friend, who boasted that she had a new boyfriend. Chloe left the house to meet her, and the girls were picked up by the quote unquote boyfriend, who was in fact a 25-year-old Indian man. Initially, Chloe thought the man was nice, posher than the other men she had met in the town center. He took Chloe and her friend to shop where he purchased a bottle of vodka before picking up one of his friends and taking the girls to a secluded location. During the journey, the men began pressuring the girls for sex. Chloe refused, stating that she was on her period, but the men replied that it did not matter. Night was falling when they arrived, and the boyfriend took Chloe's friend out of the car, leaving Chloe alone with the other man. He proceeded to rape her on the back seats. This incident took place in 2003. In 2022, Chloe took the two men to court, but neither were found guilty. Oh man, there are so many failures systemically already throughout this entire story. From this moment, Chloe's life spiraled. At 12 years old, she began drinking heavily, smoking large amounts of cannabis, and taking harder drugs, including ecstasy. Quote unquote, anything to block it out of her mind. She would drink before school just to get through the day, and her attendance dropped significantly. She and her friend would spend hours school hours in the town center walking around until somebody picked them up in a car. Somebody bought them alcohol or somebody gave them drugs. There were times when Chloe would be missing for up to 3 days, during which time she was passed between taxis, drugged, abused, and raped. In every case, the perpetrators were Muslims and primarily Pakistani. On one occasion, Chloe was abducted by an abuser who was driving drunk and taken to a graveyard. He gave Chloe, still 12 years old, whiskey before forcing himself on her and raping her. He withdrew before ejaculation and forced the empty whiskey bottle into Chloe's vagina where it shattered. Chloe admitted herself to A&E, but no questions were asked about how she had sustained such an injury. She was examined, the glass was removed, and she was discharged. Oh my goodness. Chloe was questioned by police due to her absence on a number of occasions. Each time, she was asked where she had been, who she had been with, and what she had been doing. She replied that she had been having sex with adult males in cars. And rather than opening an investigation and pursuing her abusers like they should have done, like police are supposed to do, the police dismissed Chloe as a prostitute. They asked her, she's 12 years old, by the way. They asked her whether she was consenting to the sexual activity. And despite Chloe telling them that she did not know the definition of the word consent, they reported that she had been. The police found Chloe as well as other missing children in cars with gang members on multiple occasions, but they let the gang members go without so much as questioning them. On one occasion, Chloe was in the town center and was identified as a missing child by a police officer who questioned where she had been. Chloe told this police officer about the full extent of the abuse, and the response of the officer was that nothing could be done, and Chloe was let go. In response to her truancy and deteriorating behavior, the school regularly placed Chloe in isolation and compelled her to attend additional after-school classes every day. This did little to improve her emotional state, and she continued to spend time with her friend and her friend's quote-unquote boyfriend. This went on for a number of years. The quote-unquote boyfriend would supply the girls with alcohol and drugs, as well as introducing them to his friends, who were exclusively South Asian men. On one occasion, he took the girls to his place of work, a textiles factory, where he raped Chloe. Following this incident, Chloe stopped spending time with the friend who up until this point had accompanied her throughout her exploitation. By this time, Chloe had become so accustomed to her lifestyle of spending time with the Muslim gangs that she continued to do so without her friend. On one occasion, following another late return home, her mother grounded her for 2 months. Fearing further abuse from her stepfather, Chloe walked to a nearby social services office while her mother was at work and reported him. Chloe was interviewed by the social services worker about the abuse, after which her mother and stepfather were arrested and questioned. Both denied that the abuse was taking place and were released without charge. Chloe made further appeals to social services and was eventually removed from the house and placed in foster care. She lived with a couple who cared for several other foster children, and though she found them snobby and judgmental, found some semblance of stability with them, but it did not last long. She was still living in the same town, so when she went into the town center, as she often did both alone and with her foster carers, the Muslim gangs would recognize and target her. She remained at the same school, and because she now lived further away, the foster carers paid for taxis to take her there. She would ask the taxi drivers to drop her near the school, and rather than attending, would walk to one of the neighborhoods where the Muslim gangs spent their time. The gangs would take her into their taxis, ply her with drugs and alcohol, and sexually abuse her. Around the age of 13, Chloe disclosed to social services that she was being sexually abused by gangs of Muslim men. In response, social services did not intervene, but rather talked to Chloe about contraception and sexual health. Oh my goodness. There are many people in this story so far that need to be put down. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you just allow this to happen is beyond me. One social worker started regularly taking Chloe to a sexual health clinic where she was diagnosed with chlamydia in her throat and vagina, gonorrhea, genital warts, and pelvic inflammatory disease. Oh man, poor girl. Neither the social workers nor the clinic staff questioned or reported this. The police were aware of Chloe's activities, but instead of targeting those responsible for her abuse, they routinely failed to question them, let alone pursue further action. When Chloe was found in cars and houses with them, Chloe was soon moved to a different foster placement with a far more protective carer. On one occasion, a gang came to the foster home searching for Chloe, and the carer fought them in the street to protect her. Good for him. Around the time Chloe turned 14, a social worker approached her about her ongoing sexual exploitation. This was one of the first times this had happened, and Chloe was relieved that her abuse was finally being addressed. However, rather than offering a solution, the social worker instead told Chloe that the producers of Emmerdale were looking for a young actress to play a victim of child exploitation and asked whether she would be interested in auditioning for the role given her experience. Are we serious? When I heard this part, I was like, I was actually gagging. I cannot believe this is so disturbing. Following this exchange, Chloe, upset, angry, and in a state of disbelief, as she should be, ran away from the foster home and after being abducted by a Muslim gang, was missing for 6 months. Over this period, she was trafficked across the length and breadth of Britain. She was taken to house after house and raped and abused by guy after guy after guy after guy. The men who abused her paid money to the gang, which treated her as little more than a commodity. She was reported missing and her photograph was shown on TV. Her abusers remarked on this, "You're that girl off the TV that's missing." But her whereabouts were never reported to the police. Chloe describes a cycle of grooming, rape, and drug and alcohol abuse. This went on until eventually she was located by the police. When the police found her, she was in a car with a South Asian Muslim man. The man was let go without charge, and she was returned to her mother's house. Chloe's relationship with her mother had completely broken down by this point, so she continued to run away and her psychological state deteriorated further. Following another period of grooming and sexual exploitation by a Muslim gang, Chloe was taken into police custody and transported to a secure unit at a children's home. She describes the home as being like a prison. Every aspect of her life was controlled and surveilled, and she was routinely subjected to bodily examinations, including full cavity searches. What the? Chloe found the experience highly traumatic. She remained there for 9 months, by which time she was almost 15. Social services determined that she was well enough to be released and she was placed in foster care not far from where she had been living before. Chloe describes the new carers as positive and encouraging presence in her life, and in spite of her proximity to the sites of her abuse and exploitation, Chloe found stability and security living with them. She enrolled in a full-time hairdressing and beauty course at a nearby college, and for the next 2 years, Chloe describes her life as fantastic. As Chloe approached her 18th birthday, social services notified her that the foster care would soon end. They identified a house for her, and after parting ways with her carer, she moved in and got a retail job to support herself. Despite having little experience taking care of herself, Chloe's life remained generally stable through this period. Eventually, Chloe reestablished contact with the friend whom she'd been abused with as a young child. She invited her over to her house, and when she arrived, she was accompanied by a group of Muslim men, all of whom remembered Chloe from past abuse. Immediately, Chloe's life was thrown back into chaos. The men refused to leave, and in Chloe's words, it was no longer my quiet little house, it was their house. They smashed windows, kicked in doors, left the house an absolute wreck, and sexually abused Chloe. One of the men, a previous abuser, pinned her down, pulled his trouser down, and sat on her face, orally raping her on her own sofa as the rest of the gang watched. Chloe returned to drugs and alcohol to cope. Though she was still working in retail, her ability to work was rapidly declining. During one shift, one of her colleagues, someone she was friends with, jokingly pinched her bottom. Chloe, traumatized by the years of abuse, punched him in the face in the middle of the shop. She was brought before management and tried to argue her case, but was fired. Left with no income, Chloe spiraled further. The Muslim gang was still was still occupying her house, and with nowhere else to go and no ability to remove them, she remained there with them. They routinely drugged, abused, and raped her, including with objects, including soft drink cans, keys, and a baseball bat. Man, this is really graphic, guys. Before long, they started to pay her bills to consolidate their presence in her home. On a number of occasions, they brought young children into Chloe's house to abuse them. Chloe recalls a number of occasions when boys under the age of 18 from the Muslim community were pressured and bullied by their older friends and relatives into raping her. Chloe was forced to commit crimes, including insurance fraud and the holding of drugs. On one occasion, she contacted the police to report an assault that was taking place in her house, and when they arrived, Chloe was threatened with arrest rather than the gang members as the property was registered in her name. Wow. One evening, an associate of the gang from a neighboring town arrived at the house, a notorious sex trafficker. He soon began taking Chloe to bars and nightclubs in the surrounding area. There, he would spike her with heroin before handing her over to men who sexually assaulted and raped her. Chloe became addicted to opiates and her health deteriorated rapidly. She became anorexic, weighing just 5 stone at the age of 18. The use of heroin was a method of control by the gang, as it left her with no ability to defend herself physically. Her daily existence became a relentless cycle of rape, exploitation, and violence. Eventually, a social worker visited Chloe and was shocked by both her appearance and the conditions in which she was living. Concerned for her welfare, she took Chloe to an addiction clinic where tests revealed an extremely high concentration of opiates in her system. Chloe was prescribed medication to manage her opioid dependency and gradually weaned herself off the drugs. Around this time, Chloe reconnected with a childhood friend, and their friendship soon developed into a romantic relationship. Her boyfriend became aware of the ongoing abuse and, with the help of his father, paid off Chloe's remaining rent and moved her out of her squalid house. Chloe moved in with him, after which she got another job in retail. For a short period, Chloe's life was relatively stable, but due to her unresolved trauma, she returned to drinking heavily, smoking cannabis, and gambling. Her workplace was close to her first foster home, and before long, she came back into contact with members of the gang that had abused her at that time. The cycle of grooming, exploitation, and abuse soon resumed. Her relationship with her boyfriend broke down, and out of desperation, she reestablished contact with her mother, who had left her predatory husband and soon moved back in with her. One night, Chloe was out with members of the gang and drinking heavily. Upon her return to the mother's house, her mother reported her to the police. The police arrested Chloe while she was changing into her pajamas, and she was taken to the police station drunk and half naked. She was kept in a cell until 2 a.m. the following morning, at which point she was released. They did not provide her with any clothes or transportation back to her mother's house. She tried to contact her ex-boyfriend, but he did not respond. Chloe, then 19, was left stranded. She wandered around the neighborhood for several hours before encountering a gang member who had previously abused her. Cold and desperate, she got into his car and for the following weeks was trafficked across the country. Eventually, Chloe identified a new house to move into. Despite their dysfunctional relationship, her mother agreed to sign the rental agreement as Chloe's guarantor, I don't know what that is, as Chloe, then without income, knew she would not be able to afford rent. After she moved in, she became aware of the fact that she was the only white British person in her neighborhood. Every other resident was South Asian. As a result, the gangs discovered where she was living and once again treated her house as if it was their own. The cycle of abuse continued, and Chloe's emotional state deteriorated significantly. Chloe was taken to hospital after a suicide attempt, and while there, she discovered that she was pregnant. The father of the child, a Pakistani Muslim illegal migrant, moved into Chloe's home. Chloe was subsequently coerced into converting to Islam and forced into marriage, both to legitimize the pregnancy in the eyes of her abuser and to assist him in securing a visa. Chloe's behavior became tightly controlled. She was forced to wear a hijab, she was prohibited from looking out the windows of her home, and if she misbehaved in the eyes of her husband, he would beat her black and blue, something that happened every day. Chloe's child was born with multiple health problems, including a defective kidney due to the deteriorated conditions of Chloe's womb as a result of the sexual abuse. Nevertheless, becoming a mother gave Chloe a renewed determination to get her life back on track. She reported the father of her child to the police after he assaulted the child, and he was removed from the property. She stopped taking drugs, she was focused, and for the first time, the gangs left her alone. One evening, she went out with a friend who lived across the road. Chloe, now a mother, did not drink heavily, but her friend became heavily intoxicated. A group of Asian men started speaking to them and offered to take Chloe and her friend home. Chloe was suspicious of them, but for the sake of her friend, she agreed. Instead of taking them home, however, they were taken to a hotel. Chloe, who was not drunk, protested and encouraged her friend, who was paralytic, to leave with her. Chloe warned her friend about what she suspected was going to happen, but her friend refused to leave. Chloe, thinking of her daughter and seeking to protect herself, reluctantly left without help without her. The following day, Chloe's friend told Chloe that she had been raped by the men. The incident represented a turning point in Chloe's life. She decided that she needed to leave her hometown for good and get as far away from these Asian men as possible. By chance, she reconnected on Facebook with a man she had known in her early childhood, an old colleague of her mother, who she describes as one of the only adult men in my life who never harmed me or treated me badly. She told him about everything she had been through and her desire to leave. He lived in Scotland, and she was invited to visit him for the weekend, which she did. After returning home, she sought support from Women's Aid, who managed to secure her a property in Scotland. With nothing but her daughter and a small bag, she left her hometown, leaving a lifetime of abuse and exploitation behind, and moved to Scotland, where she resides to this day. Chloe personally knows at least 20 other girls from her area who were predated on by the Muslim gangs who abused her. The pattern was always the same: grooming, drugging, trafficking, abuse, and rape. Furthermore, Chloe describes being taken into mosques where imams would describe non-Muslims as infidels and preach that white women who dressed inappropriately were free game. Basically, what that means is dressed inappropriately is if you just dress normal and you're not wearing a full burqa with everything covered, to them is inappropriate. Chloe believes that the local police, social services, NHS, and government were all fully aware of what was happening, including the racialized nature of the crimes. But that did not intervene for two reasons. But they did not intervene for two reasons: because they could not be bothered with the paperwork. They were worried about paperwork when this was going on, and because they did not want to be seen as racist. Chloe blames these bodies and their major push for diversity for her abuse. Chloe says that if I can save just even one more child, girl or boy, from going through any of this, then I've done my job. Wow. We need to take a breather for a second. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. Inquiry panelist. Do you know how many men abused you over that period if you had to guess? Hundreds, hundreds, and hundreds, and hundreds. This next one, her name was Fiona. Fiona grew up in a highly abusive household marked by domestic violence, severe emotional abuse, and repeated suicide attempts by her mother, which Fiona witnessed. Despite exceptional academic ability, she developed serious mental health difficulties, self-harm behaviors, and suicidal ideation from a young age. After escalating abuse and failed disclosures, Fiona entered care at the age of 13. She was placed in a children's home that had already been identified as high risk for sexual exploitation in a television documentary prior to her arrival. Why that place wasn't shut down is beyond me. But as you can see, it's very clear that There are people who were in sects of government that knew that were supposed to help these types of victims and turned a blind eye to it. After escalating abuse and failed disclosures, Fiona entered care at the age of 13. Okay, hold on. Let me get back to where I was. Um, Inadequate supervision meant she went missing repeatedly. At 13, she was groomed by adult Pakistani men, whom she estimates were aged between 24 and 45. The grooming began with affection and alcohol, quickly progressing to rape, drug dependency, threats, and trafficking. Care staff negligence was extreme. Abusers would sit in cars outside waiting for the girls, openly converse with staff, and even phone the home to inquire about them. One care worker told Fiona's mother that her boss had described recording the men's car registration plates as above her pay grade, warning that she would lose her job if she did so. Fiona believes that staff were aware of what was happening but felt powerless to stop it rather than being actively complicit. Nevertheless, the children's home received €5,000 per week to care for her and failed miserably. Fiona suspects the management avoided proper investigation for fear of being labeled racist. There that is again. There's a trend here. Only the police took any formal action, issuing harboring notices to the men, official warnings stating they had no permission to associate with, contact, or house a vulnerable child. However, no further action followed. When Fiona's mother called the police to report her daughter missing and mentioned a history of abuse by Asian men, the call handler told her, "You can't describe them as Asian men because that's racist. You should just be glad your child is being taught a different culture." Oh my God. On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the men to have fun with her. On another occasion, police instructed the abusers that if they could persuade Fiona to sign herself out of care, the police would stop bothering them. The gang then tried to convince her to do so, intending to traffic her to Kashmir. She was only prevented from leaving the country because she did not have a passport. Between 2008 and 2012, Fiona was repeatedly raped by multiple men connected to organized grooming networks. She was often kept in a house known as the party house, where between 10 and 20 men would attend at one time. On one occasion, she was encouraged to bring her friends because the owner had relatives visiting from Birmingham to celebrate Eid and expected girls to be there. Within the house, the girls were routinely referred to as white slags, while the men wanted Pakistani girls kept pure for marriage. The gangs reportedly discussed fears that the English Defense League would arrive armed, so they kept baseball bats for protection. They also allegedly spoke of attending EDL demonstrations with weapons. Fiona was not only trafficked and raped across multiple cities in the UK, but was also forced to traffic drugs. Drugs, intimidation, and violence were used to control her. She was made to clean up the knives from the scene of 2 fatal stabbings. She was present during a shootout. Her abusers bragged to her that they had hidden dead bodies in a certain location. A few days later, Fiona recalls the news reporting on a body being recovered from the same location that the abusers had disclosed to her. As a result, threats of violence carried enormous weight. At 14, Fiona was abused by a man known as Rambo. He had entered Britain illegally in the back of a lorry. Previously castrated in Pakistan as punishment for child abuse, he had then fled to the Philippines, where he allegedly attacked multiple women and children with a large knife. The origin of his nickname. Rambo was locked in a room with 2 girls and subjected them to extreme sexual torture. This case illustrated that, in some instances, the sexual abuse of children was driven more by humiliation and control than by sexual gratification. Yes, that's what predators do. That's why they do this, because they want vulnerable people who they can control and have power over. At 15, Fiona became pregnant while in a mixed sex care home. Her son was later removed and adopted due to the ongoing exploitation risks. Yet Fiona herself was left in the same dangerous environment. The abuse continued into her adulthood. It only stopped when she turned 18, leaving her with profound physical and psychological trauma, including PTSD, substance dependency, and long-term health damage. Fiona states that the greatest harm came not only from the abusers, but from institutional disbelief, neglect, and punishment that actively enabled the ongoing exploitation. In total, she estimates that she was abused by between 50 and 100 men. Of those, only 2 were not Pakistani. Fiona. I was beaten regularly, I was drugged, filmed being raped, and the footage was distributed. I sustained broken bones, facial injuries, and severe trauma. I was subjected to racial abuse in the community and blamed by families of the predators, of the perpetrators. All right, let me check my time here real quick. All right, we're at 34 minutes. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to read like two more. But you can go find this report yourself. I will link it below at the bottom of this video. I just think it's really important that as many people as we can who are able and have a platform of some kind that are able to talk about this and speak out, that we should all do it. Michelle was physically abused in childhood by both her mother and stepfather. Her mother had multiple partners throughout Michelle's childhood, many of whom also abused her, some sexually. She believes this early experience created an association between abuse and love, leaving her particularly vulnerable. From the age of 13, she was groomed by 3 adult Pakistani brothers who supplied her with alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs. She was raped while intoxicated, including one occasion when she was taken upstairs while her sister tried to intervene. Because of her upbringing, she thought this was normal, that they were her boyfriends, and that they loved her. She would go missing for extended periods and was subjected to repeated daily sexual abuse. The perpetrators would collect her from her school, her home, and public spaces, using threats of violence to coerce and control her. At age 14, she was gang raped and beaten by 3 men who had locked her in a house. She was left covered in cuts and bruises, which alerted a friend. The friend told her own mother, who then contacted Michelle's mother. The police were called, but they claimed there was little they could do without more evidence. One of the gang members later forced Michelle to go to the police station with him to retract her statement. The police accepted him as her appropriate adult. Oh my, a role normally reserved for a parent, close family member, social worker, or trained professional. Disgrace. The investigation was subsequently dropped. One of Michelle's friends who lived in a care home would be collected directly outside by the same gang. Care staff would call the police, but officers reportedly referred to the girls as prostitutes, despite them being children. Both social services and the police, Michelle says, failed to understand the situation and believed the girls were engaging in the activity by choice. As a result, little was done to intervene. When she was abducted and went missing, no one came looking for her. A social worker once told her that at age 14, she would be allowed to live with her 30-year-old boyfriend as long as they did not share a room. What kind of a social worker is that? Michelle was raped in bin sheds, threatened with a knife, and forced into sex with multiple men waiting in cars. She was drugged, beaten, burned with cigarettes, locked in rooms, and passed between men. An amusement arcade was used as a front for drug dealing and the sexual exploitation of children. She became pregnant 4 times as a child as a result of rape, leading to miscarriages, 1 abortion, and 1 surviving child. Of her abusers, she states 98% of them were Pakistani Muslim. If not, they were Iraqi Muslim or Kurdish. Michelle believes these gangs have remained untouchable because authorities feared being labeled racist. She describes an extensive network of abusers operating across the entire country, calling it industrial in scale. It functions as a large central network with smaller connected groups in specific localities. Michelle claims she was raped by between 600 and 700 different men over the course of 3 years. Oh my. She now lives with severe PTSD and lifelong trauma, describing both her childhood and future as destroyed. Inquiry panelist, what would you say the main issue was? Michelle, I don't think that they cared much about us. They didn't want to open that can of worms because it's a religion thing. I'd probably say 98% of them were Pakistani Muslim. If not, they were Iraqi or Kurdish. We're going to read probably 1 or 2 more. So this is Whitney. Whitney grew up in a vulnerable household. Her mother suffered from severe mental health issues and her father was absent from her life. So as you can see, there's a pattern here. Children in a vulnerable situation with parents that were also vulnerable or, had other stuff going on with them that they couldn't fully parent and be present. This is like the type of thing predators look for. She was first groomed and sexually abused at the age of 15 by 2 adult Pakistani brothers. One of the brothers, Whitney recalls, acted as a boyfriend figure. Both brothers would regularly take her to a flat in Birmingham, supply her with alcohol, and in her words, she would have sex with them. Their interactions with Whitney soon turned violent. They began beating her and on one occasion held a hot iron to her face. Whitney recalls that the brothers stopped contacting her after they arrived at her house to collect her and found all of her uncles sitting on the wall outside. After that incident, they never came back. She cannot remember exactly how or why her uncles were there, but she believes her mother had asked them to intervene. Many years later, Whitney's daughter began self-harming at age 11 and even attempted suicide. Her phone was her phone contained sexually explicit messages. Whitney's daughter told her there was a sex room at school run by the older boys. At school? What? Deeply concerned for her daughter, Whitney contacted social services. They offered little support beyond talking through the problems. In one instance, social services accidentally sent her 6 other children's case files instead of her daughter's, which left her deeply distrustful of their ability to help. Yeah, obviously. Whitney's daughter was coerced into sending a sexual image, which was then circulated across multiple schools, the local community, and eventually the internet. This led to her receiving unwanted attention from adult men of various ethnicities and from multiple countries. From that point on, Whitney's daughter began going missing regularly. These disappearances were directly linked to sexual demands and exploitation by older boys and men. She was threatened with violence if she contacted the police and sometimes returned home with items of clothing missing. Whitney repeatedly reported her concerns to the police and social services, clearly stating that she believed her daughter was being sexually exploited. Police responses were often delayed, statements were not taken, and investigations were closed without further action. Social services refused to relocate the family, downgraded the risk level, and eventually closed the case despite ongoing exploitation. Whitney herself was blamed, and her own past was used to undermine her credibility as a parent. Her family received repeated threats, including warnings that their house would be burned down, faces would be slashed, and machetes would be used. Later, Whitney discovered that her daughter had been placed on the National Referred Mechanism as a trafficking victim without her being informed. The NRM is the UK's official framework for identifying, referring, and supporting victims of human trafficking and modern slavery, and serves as a recognition by a designated professional that an individual is a potential victim of human trafficking or modern slavery. Yeah, sounds like it's not doing very much. Whitney, my daughter told me after a while that there was a sex room in school. I told the school about it, but they completely shut it down and said she was lying. Oh my. Let's see how long Sally's story is. Let's read Sally. Sally is the mother of a daughter who was found guilty of 9 counts of perverting the course of justice for lying about being groomed by an Asian grooming gang and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Despite this, Sally believes there's evidence to suggest her daughter was a genuine victim of the gangs. Sally described a previously stable working family life until housing instability and family stress coincided with changes in her daughter's behavior. The house the family were buying fell through, but they had already moved out of their family home and all their possessions were in storage. A family friend was able to rent them a part renovated property on a short term basis, but it was not ideal for a family with 4 children. It was only meant to be temporary, but the family ended up staying there for 10 months. Her daughter began making up stories, such as claiming her mother and stepdad were going away and leaving her to look after a 5-year-old brother at school. This resulted in school involvement in their family life. The stresses this household was under led to arguments that brought in both the police and social services. After leaving school at 16, Sally's daughter began working at a local pub. On one occasion, she was invited to a party. Sally received a call later that evening from one of her daughter's friends saying that their daughter was lying on the pavement outside the property. If Sally couldn't pick her up, they were going to take her to the bus stop and leave her there as she was making too much noise. When her mother found her lying on the ground, she was making a horrendous wailing sound and kept saying not to touch her. Her mother recognized that something was seriously wrong and took her to the hospital. Sally's daughter told the nurse carrying out the examination that she had been sexually assaulted. The hospital notes recorded that her genitalia were swollen and red. The hospital reported that they reported the incident to the police. Sally's daughter then received threats via Snapchat, became scared about the outcome of the case, and withdrew from the process. Around the same time, social services closed their case on the family. Sally believes her daughter did not want to invite more trouble into the household. It later emerged in court that they had all been smoking cannabis. Sally believes her daughter had participated and that something had happened to her, but she was found guilty of lying about being raped. Become guilt? Like, how? Sally's daughter then began working as a kitchen assistant at a care home and a glass collector at a nightclub, in addition to her pub job. After turning 18, she was able to work behind the bar at the nightclub, where her behavior began to change. She would return home with cuts and bruises. On one occasion, she came back with a black eye and said there had been a fight in the nightclub and she had been hit accidentally. She appeared more tired and distressed than usual. Sally began to notice that her daughter's phone would ring regularly with Asian men's names appearing on the screen. When asked about them, her daughter tried to hide the calls. The bar manager stopped her daughter from working on the main floor because she was small and they struggled to keep track of her. They also ensured she was always paired with an older member of staff, as the Asian men would harass her if she was working alone. One Asian man gifted her a gold chain. Sally's daughter began saying she wanted to move away from home. She had regularly traveled to a nearby town by train. Sally would pick her up and drop her off at the station, and she never appeared to have been drinking or using drugs. One day, Sally returned home to find her daughter had left with her possessions and was ignoring her calls. She had told work colleagues that she had moved because her stepfather was harming her, but this was not true. After a few days of investigation, Sally managed to find where her daughter had moved to. When she arrived at the flat, she found her daughter with the two police officers to whom she was reporting an allegation of rape. When her daughter handed her her phone as evidence, the police found hundreds of messages from Asian men, quote unquote. They believed she was being groomed. She was later found guilty of lying about the rape she had reported. Over the course of the following year, Sally reported her daughter missing 39 times. She would often turn up in various towns across the region, battered, bruised, intoxicated, or on drugs. She was usually without underwear and spent increasing amounts of time in the hospital. One police force made a referral to the NRM believing she was a victim of trafficking. Another police force repeatedly arrested her and seized her phone, which meant the referral agency could not contact her as her number kept changing. One incident involved Sally's daughter being locked in a room above an Indian restaurant, with the man refusing to let her leave. The police ignored it, believing she was lying. Another incident involved an Asian man, quote unquote, following her, trying to grab her and take her away. Thankfully, she was with her sister and friends who quickly put her in a taxi and sent her home. That same man was later arrested for breaking into a woman's house, and sexually assaulting her while she slept. Nevertheless, the police still insisted Sally's daughter had been lying about the earlier incident. The police believed she had a mental health condition and was deliberately self-harming and putting herself in dangerous situations. Are we serious, police? What are you guys even doing? They wanted to have her sectioned, but a doctor disagreed, noting that she still had capacity. I don't know what that means. Another incident involved a different quote unquote Asian man who refused to leave Sally's daughter's flat. Police told him to leave but asked no questions. He left behind a balaclava, yet the police showed no interest despite him carrying it while visiting a young woman. I'm assuming that's like a knife or something. After her flat door was kicked down in yet another incident while she was missing, she returned to her mother's home. Sally's daughter later explained that she had moved away to keep her family safe. She claimed she had been told that if she did not do as her abusers said, they would harm her brother, rape her sister, and firebomb the house. She had lied to her colleagues about her stepdad to avoid bringing repercussions on the family. She went missing again. The police stated they believed she was making the whole thing up and injuring herself, so they charged her with perverting the course of justice. Oh man, these police are just a sad excuse for police. Part of her bail conditions required her to not leave Sally's house. The following week, her daughter attempted suicide by overdose. She went missing one final time and was found in a field with injuries to her head and ear, a severed finger, and numerous cuts and bruises. Following this, she wrote a post on Facebook alleging that she had been a victim of grooming gangs. The post went viral. Within half an hour, the police arrested her and she was sent to prison. Following her daughter's conviction, the family experienced sustained harassment and intimidation, particularly from one Muslim man. Sally reports repeated failures by the police to protect them. She believes her daughter was a vulnerable young woman who lied at times but was nevertheless groomed. Well, yeah, like when you're groomed, they tell you to lie. Like that's how that works. That's how they get away with it. Look, we've been reading for almost 50 minutes now, so I am going to cap it here. I'm starting to kind of trip up my words a little bit as I read, but please go read this. It's very important that people are aware of this, because this is not something that you're going to see on the mainstream media, and it's just important. So if you watch this whole video through, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. And please leave your thoughts and comments below on this, and please make this, a conversation. So prayers for the victims and their families, and for the UK. And thanks again for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.